Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. As an elite level runner and coach, I'm excited to introduce you to the All In Running Club. The All In Running Club exists to help you become a better runner. Whether you're a beginner, an elite runner, or anywhere in between, the mission of the All In Running Club is to give you the tools you need to find your success in running. Join today to take advantage of the 75% off yearly membership rate offer. Click the link below in the show notes to learn more. Thank you, Dr. Pelletier, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to this.
So, as I said before we started, I'm really excited about having you on because of your knowledge of epigenetics. Before we get into all of that, like what spurred you on to wanting to go into the medical field and wanting to help people?
Well, a bit of a long story, but I really started I dropped out for a year and I traveled through Europe, the Near East, North Africa. And in the course of doing that, found myself on a little island in Greece, Tinos, Tinos.
Okay.
And it's the site of a church where miracles occur. It's kind of like Lourdes for the Christians. It's Tinos is for the Orthodox Greeks.
Okay.
And I saw people, I happened to be there sleeping under a fig tree when people were converging on this little church. And I saw people that had gnarled limbs, that were not walking, that were in extreme pain. And they would come out after whatever time they spent in this church with hands that were flexible. They were able to walk. They were able to talk. They were smiling. And I thought this violated everything I was learning in medical school about biology and physiology. It's not supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
So when I came back, I started a research program looking at what I called adept meditators. And the reason for doing that is these were people who could exhibit a marked degree of control over bleeding, pain, and infection, and demonstrated in the mid-70s for the first time objectively that this was a real phenomenon. And that just drove and still drives my interests. I saw then that people could influence their central nervous system, their biology, their organ system. And now fast forward to the present time, it's really realizing we also influence our own health and well-being down to the cellular level, to the genetic level by the choices we make. So that's the brief description of my odyssey.
So is that in one way, it really is mind over matter when it comes to our body, right? If we think ourselves, we can think ourselves healthy in some forms and fashions.
In many ways, there's I always subtle variation of mind over matter, which is that mind matters.
Right.
So there are things that can't change that are beyond, the illness is too advanced. And so, it's not that you say, oh, I think, and therefore it's going to happen, but the choices we make literally day in, day out, minute by minute, second by second, have a profound, direct, measurable, objective impact on our health, our biology, our states of mind. So that's what I do mean by mind does matter. And mind holds sway in many ways over biology, in ways that surprise me, from the studies of chronic pain to looking at people that live far beyond their life expectancy because they need to see the grandchild graduate, or you need to finish a book with their daughter or spouse. So I've been continually amazed by the power of the mind.
And so it's in combination with other things that you put yourself through, right? It's not just like, oh, well, if you just focus on what you think about, then you're going to be healthy no matter what. Like, you still have to feed yourself properly, and you still have to do other things in your environment that keep you in that healthy frame, right?
Right, absolutely. The operative term is choice. So you're
Yeah.
using mind to make choices about exercise, diet, pharmacology, medical care, the people you're with, love, hate, all the emotions that wash through us. That's the critical factor. So it's not closing your eyes and imagining something, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
Right.
I think some of us wish that it did, but it doesn't. But it does work by exerting a continual, powerful influence through our daily choices. And
Yeah.
that is a reality, and that
Yeah.
is within our control.
Because those choices, if it's meditation or just positive thinking, affirmations, things like that, you're telling your body a narrative that it will not instantaneously, but eventually it'll start to believe that in as much as it like, I mean, obviously we can't say, oh, I'm a millionaire, and the bank account's just going to change. But there's other things that you could like, I'm a healthy person, and that's eventually going to start to manifest itself because you'll start making healthier choices if you believe you're a healthy person, right?
That's absolutely true. Yeah, and that's very accurate. If we continually say, I'm depressed, I'm down, I
Mhm.
feel bad, life is bad, and things are no good, certainly that's going to manifest as negative things happening in your life. It can't
Right,
help it. There's resonance, if you will, between our belief system, our body, and our external environment.
right.
And that resonance, when that's set up to move in a negative direction, it will move in a negative direction.
Yeah,
On the other hand, if your mantra, if your belief system is, I am healthy, I'm eating correctly, I'm finding out better things about my diet, I'm learning more about my blood sugar, I know what affects my health and well-being on a dietary basis, that moves you in a positive direction. And again,
right.
these incremental second by second, minute by minute, I think that's what is lost on most people. They think the grand wish, the
Mhm.
grand visualization is going to change everything. And it doesn't.
Yeah,
There are dramatic instances of people having insights that lead to subsequent changes, but it's the changes that make things happen, not necessarily the insight.
right. And so this is where like you can have like my wife is predisposed to breast cancer. She's got the gene, it's in her family. Multiple people down her family tree have had it. Um, and so we learned that obviously years ago. And so she eats right, she exercises, like we're very focused on like, okay, well, let's do the things that we can that we know will prevent cancer. Um, and every year she gets a mammogram, and every year they're like, well, nothing yet, and they're sort of like, it's coming. And I'm on the other side going, no, we've changed that. And like, sure, she still has the potential because the gene is there. And so but if we, in my mind, if we lock the gene away to where it's like, it can't be exposed, right? That's sort of like epigenetics in a nutshell, right? We've just sort of said, okay, the gene's there, but we're not going to let it get under control.
Yeah, you've just described a perfect description of epigenetics.
Yeah.
So your wife may have a predisposition, BRCA1, BRCA2,
Mhm.
to breast cancer. But as you point out, there's a lot that you can do that she is doing
Mhm.
to minimize the expression of that
Right.
gene. So a gene is either expressed or suppressed. So you may have a strong predisposition to a disease, breast cancer as an example, or you may have a strong predisposition to a talent, like a musical talent, but you
Right.
never rehearse, you never do anything with it. It's not going to express itself.
Mhm.
So there's an interaction between the gene and the opportunity for expression. And she sounds like she's doing everything right. And I might add and underscore the screening.
Yeah.
That's critical
Yeah.
because you're not just doing these things and thinking, oh, we're fine and we're not going to bother with regular exams.
Right.
That's where the magical thinking comes in. And that's where the power of mind becomes illusory
Mhm.
and is dangerous.
Yeah.
But she's doing all the right things. I commend her, commend
Yeah.
you uh, for taking those steps. They can make a difference. That's
Oh yeah.
very clear.
Yeah.
Even if it staves off the incidences, early life breast cancer is different than late life breast cancer.
Hmm.
Its etiology, its prognosis, and its treatment. So even if she staves it off for 10 years, 20 years,
Right.
uh, that's a huge plus for everything that she's doing. And you're getting a great lifestyle in addition.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
Mark Twain had a famous quip, which is the way to live a long and happy life is to have a minor condition and take good care of it.
That's very true. And but it's like one of those things that I think so many of us get caught up in because the doctor wants to know what's your family history, what's all these things, because obviously they're trying to put together a plan of hopefully prevention. Like, okay, well, if you've got these things coming up in your future because they're in your family tree, how do we prevent them? Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes it's, oh, well, okay, you're just going to have to deal with this later on in life
Right.
or sooner in life, right? Depending on what your stage is and what you're doing. But for almost everything, like you said it, and even in the good things, like all the genes can be suppressed or expressed depending on not just food, but exercise, environment, like the way we live our lives on a daily basis, right? That all plays a factor.
Absolutely. And
It's,
really a family, your medical family history is primitive.
mhm,
That's 20th century medicine. That's not 21st century medicine.
right.
21st medicine looks at genes. I mean,
Mhm,
that's a whole different level of analysis.
yeah.
You're looking at a biologically detectable predisposition to health or disease or to some risk factor. So it takes it way beyond.
Mhm,
The personal history is still important. There's no question about that, but that's completely inadequate in the modern
mhm,
age. Unless you're doing genetic screening for particular conditions or generally a genetic screen as part of your annual physical, you're simply not living in the current age.
mhm,
The other is that with these genetic predispositions, then comes the opportunity to say, this is modifiable or not, and we can track it
mhm,
over time. And
right.
there are more and more assays coming out. Not all of them are good, by the way,
Mhm,
but there are some assays that are beginning to come out that are $300 to $400. So they're not excessive. That will map your entire genome, look at risk factors, look at blood lipids, and really give you a much more in-depth profile
mhm,
of who you are,
yeah.
what you can do, what kinds of foods affect you, what things you should avoid, what you can do. So to leave it to the family history is just not inadequate. The last thing I would add to that is if we need more complications, is that genes can tend to skip generations.
Mhm,
And
right.
there have been some fascinating, and one of the places where this was first discovered were a group of researchers in Israel looked at the offspring of the survivors of concentration camps. And
Mhm,
they assumed those survivors were have a high predisposition to stress, and they
mhm.
didn't. However, when they looked at the grandchildren of those people, they did have a high
Oh,
predisposition
wow.
to stress. So their interpretation was that the gene was there in their offspring, but because they didn't want them to suffer,
Mhm,
they didn't want them to go through what they did, they took care of them. They
right.
they they were kind, they were embracing as a family, so the gene did not express itself. But with the grandchildren, the children forgot
Yeah.
the lesson, if you will, of the concentration camp. They didn't do those things. So this latent gene that skipped the generation actually became manifest in the grandchildren.
Yeah.
Um, there's another study, just not that you need more, but overweight. So
Mhm,
this is out of Ireland. They looked at parents who were overweight and asked,
mhm.
were their children overweight? The answer was no. Then they looked at the grandparents, and what they found is that if the grandmother, so the matrilineal line, if the grandmother was overweight, the child was not necessarily overweight, but the female grandchild tended to
Oh,
be
wow.
overweight. So again, skipped a
Yeah.
generation, affected the female, not the male grandchild. So the if you will predictions, if you will, around genetics, even as sophisticated as they are still not the complete picture. We are
Right.
learning every day.
Right. Well, and this is where, and I've done a little bit of research into blue zones, and I know you've looked at that and I think that's one of the things that's helpful about blue zones is because you can take somebody and put them in a blue zone, and if they adopt the culture, their physical nature will change and become more like the
Absolutely.
people there. And it's like, okay, well, but if your genes are your genes, that shouldn't be the case, right?
Yep. That's a perfect example, and I'm a great advocate of blue
Yeah,
zones. They're controversial. I
yeah.
think Dan Buettner, who is the author of the Blue Zones, did a great job. I have great respect for him. He's a good friend. And I personally believe we have in our group here, we call it the Divine Dozen. There are 12
Mhm.
factors that are common to all of the Blue Zone communities. And we don't know if someone entering into the blue zone, depending on when in their life they do that, will be able to achieve 110 plus
Right.
life expectancy. But there's no doubt that entering a blue zone community or creating, there's actually a program now with National Geographic
Mhm.
to help communities that fulfill certain criteria actually become designated as a blue zone and enter into a program for doing that for the community and the population.
Yeah.
So they believe it's possible to extend life expectancy by you're modifying the total environment
Mhm.
of the person. That in turn is going to have, as we've talked about, a direct impact on their genes.
Right.
So this is a very real phenomena. And to me, what's wonderful about the blue zones is it doesn't take any miracle pharmacological breakthrough or
Right.
some extreme biohacking like blood transfusions or some of the things we read about.
Mhm.
These are all 12 characteristics that anyone can achieve anywhere, anytime.
Right.
And they're living, breathing right here, right now, not 10 years in the future, not 20 years in
Right.
the future. They're right now, which I think
Right.
is very optimistic. It's like the white crow. If there's one, it means it's possible. So you
Yep.
get one community where people are living to 110 means it's possible for all of us.
Well, and the other nice thing I like about it is that it's not like a strict step by step. You have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this to be able to make it work. It's, oh, well, you can have different factors. They're all similar in nature, but it's not a very tight script that you have to follow and that it becomes so difficult that nobody can really achieve it. You know, it's oh well, you have to take care of your mind in this way, and do whatever is good for you to take care of your mind and help it, be positive and less stress and all those things. And because that's the thing that I think confuses a lot of people when it comes to blue zones is that if you really look at the food, they all eat sort of a little bit differently,
Yes.
right? There's commonalities, but there's differences, which makes people go, well, just tell me what to eat. But it's not that easy.
It isn't. And if you look at the commonality in the diet, they're basically all variants of the Mediterranean diet.
Right.
So some will eat red meat, others don't. Most are pescatarian.
Mhm.
All are really mostly vegetable-based protein as their nutritional source. So and they all, they drink more wine than any of our
Right.
guidelines ever advocate, and they do so in the morning, in the midday, in the afternoon, in the
Yep.
evening. It's wine and beer, but it's always with food.
Yeah.
It's always in social company. You don't see intoxication. You don't see alcoholism. So
Mhm.
you have to look at the similarities, but then you're right. It's really the subtle differences between them that make them unique, but make them
Yes.
equally effective.
Right.
There's no one diet, if you will, for a centenarian or
Mhm.
blue zone community. There's no one right physical activity. They don't have physical trainers.
Right.
They don't
Yeah.
have gyms. They
Yep.
don't have workout centers. They're farmers.
Right.
So they lift, they bend, they walk, they ride bicycles, they use cars, but minimally. So
Mhm.
they're getting all of the aerobic and all of the musculoskeletal exertion they need as part of their life. That's
Right.
the critical factor. And I guess one of the last things I've observed with them is they don't necessarily have living to a long life as their goal.
Right.
Their goal is to live life.
Right.
And as a consequence of how they live their life, they will in fact live a long time.
Mhm.
But they don't say, oh, I'm going to live to be 110. That's my goal, and I'm going to do these things in order to achieve that objective. That's a very Western
Yeah.
reductionistic model. That's not how they think at all. They think about love, they think about caring, they think about food, they think about, you know, all the things that like make life worth living.
Mhm.
That in turn generates these wonderful long lives. I mean,
Right.
they have a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
Um, Everything about it's not idyllic. You
Sure.
know, they have we talk about periodic fasting as conducive to life expectancy extension.
Mhm.
Well, they have intermittent fasting, but it's in form of famine, crop
Oh,
failure.
right. Yeah.
You know, their crops don't turn out like they do, or they've not as plentiful in a given year. So they go through these cycles of difficulty. It's not
Mhm.
an idyllic environment, but the overall impact is of extended life and extended life expectancy.
Well, and so to tie that back into the epigenetics side of things, like the activity level, even though it's not what we consider, oh, we've got to go get our exercise, right? So we go to the gym or we run outside or whatever that is. Like their just normal life is helping their cardiovascular system flush everything out and everything works properly on a minute by minute basis. And it's not like let's go rush and get 30 minutes of high intensity and then the other 23 hours and 30 minutes we don't do anything
Right.
and we let our body go back to sludge and sitting around doing nothing. And so I think that's a big piece of they're not necessarily getting their heart rate to their target heart rate range for this amount of time, but they're just continually doing things. And that just consistency of doing that doesn't allow things like dementia or Alzheimer's or things like that to take effect because their cardiovascular system is working so well, their lymphatic system's working so well, and all these things together are just keeping the genes that may be there to turn those things on, they're just keeping them turned off.
You just gave a perfect description
Mhm.
of we're talking about a total environmental immersion.
Right.
Their community is what creates the long life expectancy.
Right.
Um, they don't exercise at 40 for 30 minutes. That's our, we tend to have a medical, biological, reductionistic approach to
Mhm.
everything.
Right.
A pill for every ill, a
Mhm.
pill for longevity, and we're spending billions of dollars.
Oh yeah.
These you know, research into longevity extension pills and diets, et cetera, they do work, but they do not produce quantum leaps. They don't produce leaps of 10 and 20 years
Right.
greater life expectancy. It might be a few weeks or a few months. And in some animal studies, maybe by a year or something like that. But we're not talking about the kinds of things we observe in the blue zones, which
Right.
is a natural outcome of their environment. So when you say exercise, they've been exercising their whole life.
Right. Right.
So there's a consistency in it, and your biology learns.
Mhm.
Our bodies are very sophisticated in some ways. When you repeat an activity, the body says, oh, this is good. I like it. I enjoy this.
Mhm.
I feel fatigued, or it lets me sleep at night. And it's that repetition of good behaviors. They don't decide, I'm going to be a vegetarian because I
Right.
want to live a long time.
Yeah.
They don't even think that way. They think about what foods are available,
Right.
how to create nutritious foods, and how do I avoid the things that make me feel bloated or full or
Right.
and it's this biological wisdom that they've tapped into that in turn allows what I think is a predisposition of all of us to live to be about 120.
Mhm.
That's that's the real upper limit of our
Yeah.
biology, and I think it's actually more than that. There's a finding that goes back almost 40 years now. It was a biologist at Berkeley, Leonard Hayflick,
Hmm.
and he asked the question: if you allow cells to replicate under optimal conditions, what would that be in terms of human life expectancy?
Hmm.
And so he did these experiments and allowed these cells to replicate under optimal conditions. And what he projected is that the life expectancy resulting from that was 120.
Okay.
So that's become known as the Hayflick limit.
Right.
Well, that's all well and good, except for the fact that most of us live 30 or 40 years shorter than that.
Yeah.
And using the white crow analogy, the oldest woman in the world who died about 3 years ago at 123
Hmm.
was Jean Calumet. She was living in Paris,
Yeah.
and she's a real character. But again, she lived beyond 120. It means
Right.
it's not an absolute limit. There's a
Right.
malleable range within even the Hayflick limit. And she was interviewed, this the sidebar, but she was interviewed when she was maybe 119 for the Guinness Book of Records. And they asked her, to what do you attribute your long life? And she said, good brandy,
Yeah.
uh, young men,
Nice.
and Gauloises. And Gauloises are those disgusting, like cigars,
Yeah. Yeah.
un- unfiltered cigars that the French love.
Yeah.
And I reported that this was many years ago, and the cigarette company seized on this because they
Oh, of
said,
course.
well, longevity and smoking, they're not antithetical. And what I immediately pointed out was that no, that's not accurate, because when she says Gauloise, these are unfiltered. They're not raised with petrochemicals. There's no
Right.
petrochemical in the paper, in the filters. They don't inhale. They puff
Hmm.
like a little cigar or a pipe. So
Right.
they're no deep inhalation. So you're not compromising your lungs
Yeah.
with particulate matter. So she's a great example of what it's like to just kind of put all these unique qualities together.
Right.
And lo and behold, she didn't intend to live to be
Oh, of
120.
course.
That
Yeah.
wasn't her goal.
Yeah.
But she was a real character and had a full and rich life. I'm getting off
No,
track,
you're
but
good.
last sidebar is apartments in Paris are very difficult to obtain. They're
Hmm.
very pricey.
Right.
They're in short supply, and you can sell your apartment to someone before you die. And when you die, the person will inherit your
Right.
apartment.
Right.
Well, she sold her apartment and outlived three purchases.
Oh my gosh.
Three different people
Wow.
bought her apartment. She outlived all three of them. So
Wow.
I actually
Yeah.
love that story.
That's funny. Well, and like talking about longevity, and I've said this before on my podcast, is that my personal goal is to live to 140.
Good for you.
And I think that I'm 49 now, I'll be 50 this year.
Right?
And the things that I have changed over the years to try and make sure that my body's in optimal shape, um, not just physically, but like from a physical fitness standpoint, but at the cellular level, like it's
Okay.
and like I went and had my yearly check, which I hadn't had done in a while because COVID hit and just issues, and I was like, I know I'm good. I'm gonna wait a few years and I'll go back into the doctor. And I got my blood work back, and my cholesterol is like just beyond fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, and
Good for
and
you.
my doctor was just like everything that he was just like, these numbers are fantastic. These numbers are great. This is amazing. You're in perfect shape. Um, but the way I look at it is what am I doing that's affecting the genes that are in my history, in my, that I think of that I have. I've never been actually tested to know what genes I've got, but just looking at family tree a little bit, looking at things that I know I've had issues with before, different allergies and things like that.
Oh,
And looking at it going, okay, well, don't expose myself to these things. Do these things to take care of myself. Focus on my mental health. Um, in looking at all those things and then looking at it going, okay, well, if I want to live to 140, that means I got 90 more years. Like looking at it that way, going, not necessarily like as a like, I'm going to do everything I could possibly do to get there, but
yeah.
like I got to take care of my body now if I'm going to have 90 more years in it.
I agree. I
You
agree.
know?
What you're raising is, what do you do? What are you going to do if you live to be more than your Social Security age?
Right.
For women is 81, men is 77.
Right.
Well, what if it's 20 or 30 years longer? What are you going to do financially? How
Mhm.
are you going to live? Where are you going to live? What are you going to be doing? What's going to happen with your children? What happens with
Right.
all of the other centenarians? Because centenarians globally are increasing exponentially.
Right.
It's the largest growing populations on the planet.
Yeah.
So this is inexorable that people are living longer periods of time.
Mhm.
The social impact is enormous.
Yeah.
And we need to address that now because we can't afford the medical care, at
Right.
least in the United States, with the youngest. We have the youngest average age population on the planet.
Yeah.
And yet we spend more than $4 trillion, $4 trillion on medical care in the United States.
Mhm.
That's twice the next highest nation, which is Germany, per capita per year,
Right.
and not getting health. Going, if you look at the World Health Organization,
Mhm.
the ranking of the post-industrial nations, the United States ranks 37th in homicides, fatalities, infant mortality, et cetera. The country that we're tied with, one country at
Yeah.
number 37, it's Bosnia.
Oh my gosh.
Bosnia.
Yeah.
Bosnia spends about 1/10 of what we spend per year.
Mhm.
So the point is, it's not dependent on more and more monetary expenditure. It
Right.
is dependent on people having the awareness that you're bringing through your programs,
Right.
that you express with your own personal, um, if you will, choices that
Mhm.
you're making. That's what it's all about.
Right.
So one by one, one choice by one choice, moving toward this objective of 140. Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? You
Like,
know, you're going to have a good life between now and
mhm.
then.
Yep.
And to me, that's a very positive statement. And the optimism is a big factor. That's
Mhm.
where we go back to our very first discussion,
Yeah.
the power of the mind, the expectation that you're going to have good health, that you're going to be
Mhm.
functional, well, and alive and integrated into your family and your community at 100 and beyond is going to propel that to happen.
Right.
There's a study that was done in Canada years ago looking at Social Security, and they wanted to be able to predict who at 65 was going to be alive at 70 because they wanted to
Mhm.
do some
Right.
projections and actuarial tables.
Yeah.
So they did all of these medical tests and and they wanted to see what would predict the person being alive at 70 when they were assayed at
Mhm.
65. Turns out nothing predicted very well. There
Yeah.
was one throwaway question. They asked the person, are you pessimistic or optimistic about being alive in 5 years?
Mm.
If the person said they were optimistic, more of them were alive in 5 years than those who were
Oh
pessimistic.
yeah. Mm.
So the biological determinants failed.
Right.
The optimism, the intangible, if you will,
Mhm.
optimism actually won out in terms of extending their life expectancy.
Right.
I think that's a wonderful study.
Well, but it goes to just show so many different areas of life where that happens. Like,
Right.
having an optimistic outlook, and I think, anybody that's ever gone into a job interview, like I interviewed a lot of people in previous positions and management positions and hired a lot of people, and a lot of times I didn't necessarily hire the most qualified person based on a resume. It was, oh, you want to be here? Okay. Like you expect to get the job, you're happy to be here. We're gonna versus the other person who was like, maybe just as qualified but nervous and wasn't really sure. And then I'm like, well, I'm gonna go with the person that's excited,
Yeah,
and that plays out though in our lives and ourselves. And this is something that I believe in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that the internal voice that we have and how we talk to ourselves hear that, and like they can change based on what we tell ourselves, like over time.
absolutely. I mean, the impact of self-talk. And we're constantly talking to ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Good, that's bad. Good thing you just said that. Bad thing that you said that.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you eat that food? Whatever. We're constantly, there's an internal dialogue happening constantly, and we're not aware of it.
Yeah.
Not aware of it. And if you meditate, if you have a practice where you get quiet and centered, when you know who you are, separate from your thoughts, because you're not your thoughts.
Right.
So you're separate from your thoughts. And if you can observe your thoughts and watch what they're saying to you, are they saying good things? Are they saying bad things? Are they
Right.
building you up? Are they tearing you down? Once you see that, then you say, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to not think about, gee, my shoes don't fit very well and my feet hurt. I'm going to get new shoes. That's the positive. So I'm going to get
Right.
new shoes, and I'm going to think about that. I'm going to focus on that. So you can kind of wend your way. And part of what I think the future is that we're talking about and looking at is we have epigenetic systems. We have biomonitors. We have blood sugar monitors that are unobtrusive now that will tell us minute by minute, day by day, exactly what's happening. So if you're eating a
Right.
food and you think, I really like it, but I don't feel very well afterwards, well, you can test that and you realize, oh, that spikes my blood sugar. That's why I feel terrible. I'm going to avoid that food.
Right.
So we can fine tune the inner voice. We can fine tune our choices. And that to me, it makes me optimistic about healthy aging, extended longevity.
Right.
It's within our influence,
Yeah.
minute by minute.
Well, and I want to say it was Joe Dispenza that I heard say this, but it may have been somebody else. But the amount of time that we spend being nervous or thinking about like something that's supposed to happen in the future, right? Like whether you call it worry or concern, or in the amount of times that we'll talk through that conversation in our head. This is the way it's like 85% of the time that situation never comes up. But we spend all this time in this turmoil internally that we don't realize is negatively impacting our body because of the stress that we're putting on ourselves.
Absolutely. And it does sound like Joe, by the way.
Yeah.
He's very good at that. But again, the reality is if you visualize something negative, your body will follow. So the body is both very intelligent and very naive. It's naive in the sense that if you perceive you're going to be attacked, either in reality, you're walking out in an unsafe neighborhood, or you're going to be attacked by an IRS agent. Doesn't
Right.
matter. Your
Right.
body can't differentiate between the two. What you perceive to be a threat sets off a biological cascade in your body that is destructive. It's catabolic.
Right. Yep.
You're basically mobilizing your body to fight or flee or freeze, those three reactions. But that constant metabolic assault on your organs, your central nervous system, your digestion, your brain, has a measurable negative effect. You can measure that. On the other hand, we also know that you can change that literally in 1 second. 1 second. And the way to do that, literally, if a person is in a complete panic attack, I'm going to close their eyes, literally, that will shift from a catabolic, destructive to an anaerobic, anabolic, constructive mind body set in a second. You shift immediately just by closing your eyes, rolling your eyes back, take a deep breath, and it shifts it immediately away from that. So that shows you how powerful that little element of choice is. If you practice that,
Yeah.
it could be instantaneous. You could be in the middle of a meeting and thinking, oh, this is not going well. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Take a deep breath, close your eyes for a split second, come back, and you will be a different person. I assure you of that. I've seen that happen many, many times.
Yeah.
So again, it's a matter of our influence over our body, because it will follow. It will follow what we need.
Yeah. Well, and that stress piece, when we're that stressed out that we're always in that fight or flight, scenario internally, and our organs are jacked up because they're not getting things the way they should be getting. It's just like we're in constant
Yes.
that's also negatively affecting the genes that are like that's
Oh,
suppressing genes that are supposed to be doing work and supposed to be doing things to clean us out and all that stuff. And so it's it's not just we're also turning on negative side effects and all that, but it's like we're suppressing the stuff that's supposed to be the good stuff.
absolutely. In fact, you articulated it very well. A reviewer for the New York Times, when he looked at Change Your Genes, he said, "Oh, I get it. This is Mind as Healer, Mind as Slayer, which is a book I wrote
Mhm.
in 1977, 50 years later." And that was a great observation because in the mid 70s, we were looking at the impact of stress on the brain, the central
Mhm.
nervous organs, so the gross
Right.
anatomy of the body. Now, with epigenetic assays and epigenetic testing, we can see to the cellular level. And when you are under stress, you are directly negatively impacting the mitochondria,
Mhm.
as an example, which is the spark plugs, if you
Right.
will. Every cell is loaded with mitochondria. They fire. They use the nutrients. They
Mhm.
develop. They utilize the blood sugar levels. Those are all negatively impacted by stress. When you are under stress, it shuts down the mitochondria. It damages them. It damages every cell in your body. So we can now see that all the way from being nervous, the electrical activity in the brain, to the mitochondrial activity in the cell,
Mhm.
they're all working in unison. They all
Yeah.
work in common. And we can either influence that in a positive direction or negative direction, but it all works in tandem. It's like an orchestra.
Right.
Everything works together.
And for the people out there, like I may be wrong, but isn't the cells in your brain have the highest concentration of mitochondria?
Uh, that's a good question. I am not sure. Thank you for
Okay.
asking
I've
that.
heard that
I'm,
before.
I'm not certain. That's very possible. Certainly, cells in the brain are unique as compared
Mhm.
to the gut or the spleen, but um, I will have to
Okay.
find that out.
Okay.
You've now piqued my interest.
Well, good. But that's but no matter what it is, though, that it if when the might and this is one of the things that I think a lot of people are starting to key in on is mitochondrial dysfunction and how it can have this snowball effect throughout the whole body because as you know there are mitochondria in every cell, and so it's not just like, oh, I'm concentrating my mitochondrial dysfunction to my liver. Like, no, it's if you have it, it's going everywhere throughout everything. And so it's that's where you get this systemic issue. And it may or not be gene related. It could be environment related or stress related or but gene related in the standpoint of you're preventing those genes to come on or off
Yes,
because so
yes.
much other just junk is in the way as you go through life.
Yeah, the way you're describing it is the body is a biochemical ocean,
Mhm.
and every cell is bathed in that ocean. It's part of the ocean. It's like the dropness, if you will, of the
Yeah.
ocean is a single cell. So whatever's happening in the body as a whole is happening in that single cell. So if you
Right.
shift the body into a catabolic, high stress, high endocrine dysfunction level, that's going to affect every single cell in your body.
Right.
It's not bad to do that every now and then,
Oh,
right?
sure.
Think about it. A lot of our pleasurable activities,
Mhm.
skiing, skydiving, whatever it happens to be, thrill seeking,
Right.
it feels good. It's for because it's voluntary, it's short term, it's
Mhm.
something we elect to do. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when the source of stress is not immediate, it's not resolvable, it goes on for too long a period of time. It's that chronic assault
Yeah.
at a cellular level that changes
Yeah.
the gene expression. The body, again, is very smart. If you
Mhm.
keep saying turn off, turn off, turn off, it will turn off. If
Yeah.
you say turn on, turn on, turn on, the genes will turn on.
Yeah.
That's how we operate as a system. But I think what's new is we're realizing we have choices about that. We can
Right.
understand when we're turning things on and off, and we can understand what things we can do dietary wise, physical activity, pharmacologically,
Mhm.
social support with other people to make good things happen.
Right. And that's a key piece. And I think that there's the saying that you become the five people you hang around with, which
Yes.
which again goes back to, like, you look at the blue zones and like, okay, well, that
Yes.
makes perfect sense. And when you look at somebody who's, around people that are overweight, whether it's an office setting or whatever it is, it's like, okay, you tend to all become that way. And so it's not it's not just like from a financial standpoint or a relationship standpoint, it's the entire life, your entire body, the people you hang around with, and the thought processes that you have. And so really, yes, we want to be around people that are healthy, but we want to be around people that think positively.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The social support,
Mhm.
the phrase, if you will, that you're describing, that was actually discovered, if you will, more than 50 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, and there was a researcher at Berkeley who looked at people that had heart attacks and those that didn't.
Mhm.
And what he found is that when you match people for all the risk factors, those that had social support, friends, family, had a much lower incidence of heart disease than those who didn't.
Right.
And that's when he came up with this term. Len Syme is his name. He came up with the term social support, and it's absolutely unequivocally true.
Mhm.
And we know that people that do not have a social support system, and by the way, social support can be an animal.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you find elder people in convalescent homes that have a dog, or a dog comes in or it's brought in, that's social support. There's even a great study, I mean, this may be more detailed than you might want, but I love finding studies that have kind of
Yeah.
intrigued you,
Yeah.
tickle your brain. Judith Rodin, who's at Harvard at the time, I think she's president of Wesleyan University now. She did a study of going into a long-term care facility, and she gave people, everybody got a plant,
Mhm.
one little plant. To half the group, she called them a plant passive group. She said, okay, this is your plant, but if it lives or dies, the nurses will take care of it. They'll turn it into light, but don't worry, it's your plant.
Right.
To the other half, she said, this is your plant. If it lives or dies, it's on you. They're
Right.
not going to take care of it. They're not going to water it. If it lives, great. If not, it dies. It's your. And she came back 6 months later
Mhm.
and found three remarkable things. One is the medical psychological records for the plant active group
Mhm.
were not systematically kept, so they didn't know which was in which group, were
Right.
all better than the people who had passively taken care of the
Okay.
plant. Secondly, they looked at voluntary attendance at a weekly movie,
Mhm.
and they found that the attendance was almost twice as high for the people in the plant active group than the
Really?
plant passive group.
Hmm.
Plant.
Interesting.
Third thing they found is long-term care facilities have what they call turnover, meaning
Mhm.
death. How many
Mhm.
people die so they can plan for occupancy?
Right.
She found is that the death rate of people in the socially active group was half that of the people in a socially passive group.
Wow.
So that this was a very early finding about the fact that it can be people, the
Right.
five people you know, your family, your friends. It can be an animal, certainly,
Yep.
and it can be something as simple as a plant. So I guess the lesson is, if all else fails, plant a tulip or something.
Right. Right. Oh
It's
my gosh.
but it's a very powerful influence.
Yeah. But the choice is to be active about it,
Got it.
right? Like,
Got
and
it.
so it's like, it's not just, and I think that's the piece that people need to hear, is that it's not just, oh, I've got a gym membership. It's be active about your gym membership. It's not just, I've got a pet. It's, oh, well, do you love your pet? Do you talk to your pet? Do you take your pet for walks? Do you care for your pet? Like the amount that you put forth is going to come back, two or threefold,
Yeah,
to help you out in the long run.
that's very well said. Totally agree.
So tell us how we can get your book, Change Your Genes, Change Your Life.
It's on Amazon. You
Okay.
can order it on Amazon. And also just my website is drpelletier.com,
Okay.
and you can get it there as well. And there are articles and videos and things that we've talked about on the website that are free.
Awesome.
So it's actually kind of a fun website.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I will put the link to that in the show notes so people can get to it quickly and easily. And I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything else that like is something that somebody out there is maybe struggling with trying to figure out how to overcome maybe they've got that family history and they're just sitting there going, well, there's nothing I can do. This is what I'm faced with. To be able to come to that realization of like, oh, I can take control and start making some changes by the choices I make.
That's a good question. I think one fact, if they remember one fact of all of the things we've been talking about, is only 5 to 8% of what we see as adult disease is monogenic or fully penetrant, meaning it's caused by the gene being expressed independently of whatever happens.
Oh, wow.
So only 5 to 8% of all disease is what they call fully penetrant or monogenic. So that means that roughly 95% of what we experience as an adult is due to everything we do after we're born.
Wow.
All the choices we've been talking about today, with stress, with diet, with pharmacology, with medical care, with social support, that's what's going to govern the outcome. So if you're feeling, I don't have any choice in the matter, it's just not accurate.
Right.
And the challenge is to ask, where can I take a first step?
Yeah.
And when you find that first step, take it. Doesn't matter what it is. It may seem very odd. You may find massaging my left foot at night before I go to sleep really helps. Great.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah.
And then you'll find the next step is easier, et cetera. So there's always a choice. There's always flexibility. There's always an option. And the genes are actually in your favor.
Right. Right. Well, and that's one of the things I always tell people is that your body actually really wants to stay alive.
Yes.
So like it's going to try and fight you to stay alive. And so if you're finding yourself continually going downhill with your health, like it's the choices you're making, not just your body's giving up.
I would totally agree with that.
Yeah. So I want to thank you so much for being a guest. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you. It was yes, good questions, great insights, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.